Welcome. My name is Kareem Bardisi. I'm the Executive Director of the Ryerson Leadership Lab here on behalf of First Policy Response at Ryerson University for this major event, delivering on the commitment to Canada-Wide Childcare Plan. We're here for up to 2 hours for a discussion with the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development, the Honourable Ahmed Hussen, in conversation with Heather Scoffield, followed by an expert panel, followed by breakout rooms where you'll be able to choose the activities that you want to dive into in a deeper level, followed by a wrap up. Before we begin, I'd like to give an acknowledgement of the land on which I sit and on which Ryerson University sits. We do this as a symbolic restorative act, one among many here to follow and part of a wider and hopefully transformative reconciliation project here at Ryerson. Ryerson University is on the territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat. It is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Treaty, Treaty 13, and the Williams Treaties. And we are committed to honoring our obligations to these nations' treaties and to justice for Indigenous peoples more generally. In this project at First Policy Response, we hope to do that by creating spaces to feature Indigenous voices on our platforms, including through the First Policy Response Contributors Fund, which supports submissions from underrepresented groups, including Indigenous peoples in the policy space. And before we jump in, a little bit about First Policy Response. It's a project of the Ryerson Leadership Lab, the Brookfield Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and Matthew Mendelson. And our goal is to bring the Canadian policy community together to highlight the best economic and social policy ideas to keep us afloat and together, focusing on those ideas that get Canadians through the immediate crisis and prepare us for a sustainable and equitable recovery. We join a lot of other entities that do that. We do this in a way that brings the policy community in its full richness together. That's not just the experts and the executives and the activists, although we welcome and include them. We include frontline leaders, we include policymakers, those in the private sector, labor, academia, and the not-for-profit sector. And we invite you to continue to join in our work. We're also conscious of those who, by dint of a lack of connectivity, their frontline work obligations, their caregiving needs, their inability to access affordable, reliable, available internet, that they can't necessarily participate in this conversation in real time. We are recording it for posting in future on our future platforms at First Policy Response. But we do hope to use this conversation to invite those voices into the room as much as possible and to be mindful of those who aren't able to participate. And this is a special event. It's a special event that we're hosting in collaboration with the Toronto Star and with the generous support of the Lawson Foundation. And it's special because it's a discussion of the most consequential economic and social policy issue of our generation, you could argue, and one of the most consequential budget announcements, federal budget announcements in quite a while. I'll just read quickly from Minister Freeland's budget speech from last month. This budget commits up to $30 billion over 5 years, reaching $9.2 billion each year permanently to build a high quality, affordable, and accessible early learning and childcare system across Canada. She went on to say, this is not an effort that will deliver instant gratification. We are building something that of necessity must be constructed collaboratively and for the long term. Here is our goal. 5 years from now, parents across the country should have access to high quality early learning and childcare for an average of $10 a day. A significant transformative commitment that is not easily delivered. And as Minister Freeland, must be constructed collaboratively and for the long term. And that's why we're so pleased to have people who are associated with the childcare policy and advocacy and delivery space, people who work on behalf of children every day and on behalf of the workers who care for those children every day. And we're so delighted that we will start with a conversation between Heather Scoffield of the Toronto Star and the Honourable Ahmed Hussen. So in a few moments, I'm going to pass the mic to Heather Scoffield, Ottawa Bureau Chief and Economics Columnist at the Star. She'll facilitate an interview with Minister Hussen and then a moderated discussion with our 4 panelists. Our 4 panelists are Ken Bosanquist, J.W. McConnell Professor of Practice at the Max Bell School of Public Policy at McGill University, Beverly Jean Daniel, Assistant Professor at the School of Child and Youth Care at Ryerson University, Dr. Kate Bezanson, Associate Dean, Faculty of Social Sciences, Brock University, Diane Daly, CEO, Family Day Care Services. And a number of these experts are also contributors to our First Policy Response platform. We're delighted again to have Minister Hussen with us. He will not only be in conversation with Heather Scoffield, but he'll be staying to listen to the panel and will provide a few minutes of reflection after the panel discussion. Following that, we will engage in smaller breakout discussions. Each room will have a room commentator in a specific theme. And we might want to bring up that slide now just so you can share in advance what those themes are. We'll come back to this. You will have the chance to choose which room you can join at the end of our plenary discussion. And in those rooms, you'll be prompted to join a breakout room and look at those issues more deeply, again, participating with people in the childcare community from across Canada from a variety of perspectives. Finally, after those breakouts, we'll come back to this main room to summarize the conversation. Up to 2 hours of your time, but we think it'll be well worth it. And again, we've got people representing the full variety of views, and hopefully this can serve as a platform to actually do that collaborative work that Minister Freeland and Minister Hussen have been talking about. Thank you so much for your patience as we put on this significant nationwide event. And thanks so much to the Toronto Star, the Lawson Foundation, to Heather, Minister Hussen, and our panelists. And with that, I will throw it over to Heather Scoffield.
Thank you very much for having me, and I appreciate having the opportunity to talk directly to the minister. You know, I was just thinking, it was a year ago now when you know, I was going about my daily work and opened up my you know, labor force data to see complete devastation there in our labor force, and then. You know, that's part of my work there to follow those numbers. But all around me in my neighborhood and all around you in your neighborhoods, we are seeing mothers pulling their hair out because all of a sudden the children were home and required care all the time and work at the same time. And how the heck do you do that? And so I think we launched into a very intense conversation about childcare and its value in our society, and it's our necessity, the necessity not just for the children, but also for the mothers and the workforce more generally, and the economy more generally. So with that introduction, I'd like to just ask the minister to take us through a little bit about, I mean, you've got $30 billion here. How did it, that's such a huge amount of money. And take us through a little bit about the background of that. Was there an epiphany? How did it get to this point where you were able to, and the government was able to get to this point where you decided, okay, let's go big on this?
First of all, let's go back to the bilateral agreements. We're not building from zero. We have a strong collaborative partnership with provinces and territories, and since 2017, we've had an agreement across the country that has signed on to a multilateral framework agreement that recognizes that there are principles that we all agree on: affordability, accessibility, high quality, and inclusivity. And those agreements have made progress. We've created 40,000 affordable childcare spaces, additional spaces, through the use of federal dollars. And progress was being made, and we were always in conversations with provinces and territories to see how that work was ongoing. And then the pandemic hit, and the COVID-19 pandemic has really highlighted the importance of having a national system of early learning and childcare that truly ensures that no child is left behind, that ensures that parents, especially women with children across the country, are able to have a choice, a real choice to participate in the economy, to open a business, to go back to work, to go to school. Choices that are denied to so many parents, especially women with children. And I think that realization, through the reflections of so many Canadians looking at the negative impacts and the disproportionate impacts of COVID-19 on women, for example, really came to the realization that this is something that we needed to do, and that, and again, I want to emphasize this point, it's the next big step. It's the next chapter in what has been a very effective partnership between provinces and territories and the federal government on early learning and childcare. So for me, it is a big step. It's a huge next chapter, but it's still the next step. It's not starting from zero. And that's why I think this time it's different, because we are building on a strong foundation, and the momentum is there. The awareness of the importance of this policy has increased in the minds of Canadians. You see characters that have never really commented on this really coming out really strongly for affordable childcare. CEOs, heads of chambers of commerce and business, bank presidents talking about we need affordable childcare. You haven't seen that in the past, and I think that's because they understand quite rightly that this is not just a smart social policy, but a much needed economic policy, especially when we talk about the economic recovery that we expect to have after the pandemic is over. And that recovery can simply not happen without a serious, viable plan to include women in the economy. And no viable plan to include women in the economy will be serious unless it includes access to affordable and high quality childcare.
So just to pick up on that, you know, if it makes so much sense at an economy level to invest in a big way in childcare, it also does that not also make sense at an individual firm level? And
Yes.
if it makes so much sense to invest in childcare to keep your workforce going, why is this not something that we should be looking to the private sector to actually develop up? Like if a big bank likes the idea of bringing more people, more women into the workforce, why would they not be doing it themselves? And why do we need the government to be front and center in this and leading the way?
Well, first of all, I do acknowledge, and we've said it repeatedly, that the landscape of the Canadian early learning and childcare system includes private providers and will continue to include private providers moving forward. All we are saying is that federal dollars should only go to regulated childcare spaces. Now, regulated childcare spaces consist of public entities providing childcare, municipalities, for example, and other public entities, non-profit childcare providers, and private providers. So they'll continue to be part of the mix. And again, depending on which province or territory you're looking at, the percentage, the ratio between public and private tends to differ from one part of Canada to another. But the fact of the matter is the private sector is here to stay and will continue to provide those services, and we will continue to work with them. In fact, if we intend to retain the number of affordable childcare spaces we have and then continue to grow that system, the private sector will be part and parcel of that mix. And you know, the negotiations we will have with each province and territory will determine our approach to that question. But make no mistake, we recognize and we are pragmatic enough to understand that the private childcare providers are part of the solution. They're part of delivering high quality early learning and childcare. And as long as the space is regulated by the province or territory, we're fine to deploy federal dollars to make sure that we deliver immediate relief to parents with respect to childcare fees while maintaining high quality and making sure that we have affordability and inclusivity and accessibility as part of the mix.
Okay, so take us down into your negotiations. So you know, there's, I think when we heard the budget announcement about $30 billion, there was a reaction of kind of jubilation in some corners, but also a lot of cynicism, because you know, we may have heard we've heard this story before, and it didn't actually come to fruition, not with as much money. But you know, you say this time will be different. Why why is it any different in your negotiations with the provinces? And can you give us an idea about how that dynamic is shaping up right now?
So before I answer this question, I just want to finish a thought from the previous question. I also want to highlight the fact that although we recognize the role of the private sector, we do have a preference for the nonprofit sector, because that, again, following the evidence, that's the sector that has been proven to deliver the best quality of early learning and childcare, have a strong, highly motivated and well-trained workforce. So that is our preference. But again, we understand that the private sector is part of the mix, and we'll continue to work with them. In terms of why now, I think I've partially answered that in my first response. The pandemic has really, again, brought this issue to the fore, has highlighted the importance of this investment. You've seen a number of non-governmental bodies engage in studies that have demonstrated very clear evidence of the huge return on investment that is provided by investments in early learning and childcare. The economic investments, the economic returns, the social returns, the inclusion of everyone. Some of our opponents talk about how this system will remove choice from women with children. There is not much of a choice in not having access to an affordable space, or not having access to a space at all. Parents, especially women with children, need to have that choice to access affordable and high quality childcare. And now's the time to get this done, especially when we have a moment in time where we are all talking about how we are going to recover from this pandemic recession, but particularly a recession that has been referred to as a she-cession. And that realization has also obviously enabled people to see the link between a Canada-wide system and investments in a Canada-wide system and a strong but inclusive economic recovery. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. We can, after this pandemic, we cannot return to normal, because normal was part of the problem. Normal excluded far too many people. And so in order to have a better normal, a better way of including everyone, this is one of the key pillars of that. Investing in an early learning and childcare system that is truly affordable from coast to coast to coast, that ensures that no child is left behind, that ensures that that women have true choice in accessing affordable childcare, and enabling them to be able to then participate in the economy through work and through paid work and other entrepreneurial opportunities, is really a smart and effective way to recover better. And so we're going to get it done. Now, the other piece is that there's momentum. Heather, you will be surprised to know the level of awareness about the importance of this issue has never been higher. And so it's a moment in time. We have to seize this moment. The third point is the enthusiasm and leadership exhibited by the provinces and territories. A lot of them are saying, when do we get this done? How quickly can we move? Some of them had already begun to move before the budget. Yukon Territory introduced $11 a day childcare in April. Newfoundland and Labrador, despite their fiscal challenges, has capped fees at $25 a day. So they've reduced childcare fees across the province. Nova Scotia is making similar moves. British Columbia was already experimenting, not across the province, but in certain regions, $10 a day childcare. So, there is a willingness, and in fact, almost an impatience by many jurisdictions to really move on this. People get it, and it's time to get it done, and we're seizing the moment, and we feel that this is the opportunity to take advantage. And again, Canadians are demanding this. so many stakeholders and others are saying now's the time to get it done, and I'm saying to them, I agree, and we have demonstrated through Budget 2021 and our leadership on this file that we agree with them totally, and we will get it done together with them.
So I think you and I spoke after the the fall economic statement, and you were quite adamant that there should be national standards attached to that. There should be that everybody, in order to get this, all the provinces would have to agree to a certain level of quality and certain principles in order to participate in this with the federal program. Have you articulated clearly to those provinces what those standards are, and is everybody willing to sign on to them?
Well, I'll break some news to you. They've already signed on to those principles in 2017 through the multilateral framework. That multilateral framework, the Canadian multilateral framework on early learning and childcare, emphasizes four things: affordability, high quality, accessibility, and inclusivity. All provinces and territories signed on to those principles. So they're not against that. We all agree on the basics. We all agree on delivering affordability for parents. Parents in Canada are paying too much for in childcare fees, and we want to deliver relief to them as quickly as possible. So, as you know, as you've heard Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland saying that this will take, a while to build the system. At the same time, on some elements of the system, we're moving really, really quickly. We want to deliver an average reduction of 50% in childcare fees by the end of next year. By the end of 2022, we want to reduce, on average, childcare fees by half, and deliver $10 a day childcare in childcare fees on average by 2025, 2026. And we're putting those significant dollars on the table. And by the way, for the longest time, provinces and territories were asking the federal government to do two things: to commit significant dollars and to do that in a long-term, predictable, sustainable, stable manner. We have done both through Budget 2021. Significant dollars, $30 billion over 5 years, and then $9.2 billion total federal investments permanently every year after that. That's commitment. That's showing and reassuring provinces and territories and parents, quite frankly, that we are here for the long term, and that we are determined to do this together with them. In terms of the standards, yes, we will fund only regulated spaces. But again, that leaves a lot of room for flexibility there, because regulated includes private sector, it includes nonprofit, and it includes public. This is not about a childcare system. This is about building a system of early learning and childcare. So the early learning is integral to it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with parents choosing to take care of their children at home, but that's not what this money and this investment is for. We do already provide supports to parents with children through the Canada Child Benefit, which, by the way, we're increasing yet again. We've increased it permanently in July of 2020. We are now proposing to invest more supports for families who are already receiving the Canada Child Benefit who have kids under the age of 6. So we'll be providing them with up to $1,200 this year, additional. So that support is ongoing, and we'll continue to support parents with children. But this is about building a system. And the best way that the evidence demonstrates to deliver significant savings for parents, while at the same time delivering high quality early learning and childcare, while at the same time including everyone, is to build a system. And that's exactly what we're doing.
Okay, I have a final question for you before we go into the panel, and there's so much here for the panel to discuss, so I'm kind of anxious to get to that. But my last question directly to you, Minister, is about the inclusivity. You've made the point of okay, everybody has to be able to afford this, and everybody has to have fees that childcare fees that are much lower than they are right now. But this funding is making it affordable for everybody, for people who can already afford it. And, you know, I guess there's some provinces that already have, you know, that it's income tested, and that people who can afford to pay full fees for daycare do so. Why did you decide to go this route of you know, putting so much money forward so that everybody can have access rather than making it income tested?
We'll negotiate the details of those of the elements of each bilateral agreement, obviously. But what you have seen in Budget 2021 is the broad strokes of the federal approach. But what the system will ultimately look like in terms of some of the sharper edges is something that is yet to be negotiated. So I don't want to prejudge those negotiations. But the good news is, again, there's broad consensus on the affordability. There's broad consensus on quality. I want to say something really quickly on quality. Even before Budget 2021, in the fall economic statement, we proposed to invest $420 million in federal investments to provinces and territories to help with early childhood educators, recruit more, train more, retain. Why? Because that impacts on quality, it impacts on space creation. You can't create more affordable childcare spaces without investing in the recruitment of more early childhood educators. Now, normally that's not something. Providing funding for early childhood educators recruitment and training is usually done by the provinces and territories. But the reason we're offering that is because we understand that we have a role to play and we want to help, because this is a building block in the construction of a truly national Canada-wide system of early learning and childcare. So that's about the quality. But you know, make no mistake, Heather, this is not just a plan to deliver affordability for those who already have spaces, but this is also an ambitious plan to increase dramatically the number of affordable childcare spaces. And that means working with provinces and territories, bringing them on board and working together to increase those spaces. It also means making the necessary investments and accommodations to include children, Canadian children with disabilities, for example, have to be reflected in the system. It includes making sure that we co-develop the next chapter of Indigenous early learning and childcare. There's an investment of $2.5 billion through Budget 2021 to ensure that that happens. So when we say that this is a Canada-wide system of affordability, high quality, accessibility, and inclusivity, the accessibility part is about the spaces. We have to increase the spaces. There's no point in having access to an affordable system when you can't get a space. So it just becomes a theoretically affordable system to you. So there's far too many children in Canada who are on waiting lists for affordable childcare spaces. And we intend to do something about that. We're putting forward significant investments. We are very hopeful that the provinces will also join us by putting forward their own investments. And together, we will not only bring down the fees significantly, but also deliver not only high quality, but also more affordable childcare spaces. The good news is there hasn't been a single province or territory that has come out to oppose this outright. They haven't. And in fact, 100% of them agree that we have to do something on affordability. 100% of them agree that we have to train more ECEs, that we have to recruit more. And when we speak about negotiations and building together a flexible system for each jurisdiction, they understand that that this is not something that is different from what we've been doing since 2017, but it's an expansion of that. So the good news is that I believe ultimately we will have consensus in Canada to build this system, and because we have so much in agreement. We may have a few areas of disagreement, but even there, I think once we sit down in good faith and we negotiate, we can overcome those obstacles. The general principles that underpin this system are things that we agree on, and I believe the time is now, and I believe we'll get the job done.
Thank you very much, Minister. Okay, so let's turn to our panel now. I'll just briefly introduce the panelists. Ken Bosenkool, who is the J.W. McConnell Professor of Practice at the Max Bell School of Public Policy at McGill. He is known as a conservative strategist, also a founding partner of Cool Top and Guy Public Affairs. And in his career, he served as a senior counsel at GCI Canada, was a vice president at Hill and Knowlton, was also general manager for Alberta and manager of business development. And he is known for, his insight into economics and public policy. And we also have Beverly Jean Danielle, assistant professor at the School of Child and Youth Care at Ryerson University. And she has she has PhD in sociology and equity studies, a master's in counseling and a Bachelor of Arts in honors from York University. And has worked in women and gender studies for 25 years. She's been working in education, justice, community-based and nonprofit organizations, and has also worked on the front lines with youth and families experiencing a whole range of challenges and violence, sexual domestic abuse, and so forth. We have Dr. Kate Besenson, who's an associate dean at the Faculty of Social Sciences at Brock University. And she specializes and advises in the areas of political economy, gender, social reproduction, federalism, social family labor law. And I have turned to her frequently, actually, during this pandemic to learn more about childcare policy and how it could be rolled out in the best way. And finally, we have Diane Daly, who's the CEO of Family Daycare Services. She works in the early learning sector and has an extensive repertoire of experience in the field, and is a registered early childhood educator, has a BA in sociology, gender and family, and is very passionate about access, equity, and social inclusion. This is a really excellent panel because I think we have a combination of public policy and academic and frontline hands-on experience. So I think what I'll do is just start with a question, an individual question to each of you, and open it up after you each go through. We'll do one round each, one question each, and then we'll bring you all together to hash out and answer all the questions about how we're going to make this childcare a reality for everybody. So Ken, let's start with you. If we could, you've talked, I guess, written about the need for choice and the needs to reflect regional diversity, I guess, and make make sure that childcare policy delivers immediately and to meet immediate, like you've talked about the practicality of it. Could you just expand a little bit there about what you would like to see? Are you seeing what you'd hoped for in terms of the federal policy?
Yeah, the minister was very interesting in his remarks because he kept talking about a unanimous agreement on principles, and that is certainly true. But he talked about these agreements that have been in place since 2017, and while there's been unanimous agreement on principles, in terms of what the federal government has actually funded in the various provinces, there's been bilateral deals with each province, and the money has flowed to each province according to provincial priorities. And I think that is as important a precedent as the agreement on the universal principles that he kept referring to. There's a wide, I would say, misunderstanding that what the federal government is doing here is creating a single universal common system across Canada. And that's just not what's happening. What's actually happened since 2017 is that the provinces have signed individual bilateral agreements with the federal government, and that's what's going to continue. So Alberta is going to have an agreement with Ottawa, British Columbia is going to have an agreement with Ottawa, and the system that develops in British Columbia and the system that develops in Alberta will be different, and it will be according to the priorities in those two provinces. And whether each of those provinces even puts 50% money, matching money, will be up to the provinces. And so what I've written is, what's happened in the budget is a great federal aspiration, a great amount of money on the table. And now we need to turn to the provinces, and the provinces need to either collectively or individually let the federal government know how they want to design a childcare system according to their own regional priorities. And then we can have a very interesting, very fun public debate, and the federal government can decide how to fund those systems in each one of those jurisdictions.
Okay, thank you. Beverly Jean Danielle, talk to us a little bit about what you would like to see or hope to see in terms of equity. Like, obviously the pandemic has really accentuated how some of the deep flaws in our society. Childcare is being presented as a solution to some of those problems over the long term. Do you think it can be, and how?
I think there's a number of pieces that we need to sort of think about, right? Even if we talk about childcare and we look at the way in which parents have been impacted by the pandemic, when we start to think about who are the frontline workers, what type of shifts are they working, in what way do these budgets or the amount that's put towards these issues, are they being set up in such a way that we're looking at childcare outside of the box? So are there options for 24-hour childcare that people who are working shifts can access those types of services? And even if we do have it, where will they be geographically located? Are they going to be in a space where the parents who have the most needs can actually get access to those types of supports? Or might we need to think about other ways in which we can bring what people need directly to them? If we look at, the vaccination schemes that we've implemented, have they been effective? Have they impacted those who really need it? So for me, it's always wonderful to hear about the funding that's being put in place. However, I often wonder to what extent those who are going to be most impacted by these realities are actually going to have a voice at the table, right? So what does it mean when this all trickles down? Is it going to trickle down into neighborhoods where you've got mothers who are working 12-hour shifts and need someone to watch their kids overnight, right? Are we going to look at the ways in which we also may then need to consider increasing the wage earnings of these parents so that they're able to build a more stable economic foundation? So it's not just about have we provided childcare, it's have we provided childcare and have we provided a viable living wage, and have we also looked at the ways in which the quality of care that these children in the most needs neighborhoods are being exposed to, that it's really going to have an impact on their development, on their growth, and their level of readiness for schooling.
Okay, thanks for that. I'm glad the minister's listening to this, because the money was the easy part, right? It's the here we go, right? So turning to Kate Besenson, I mean, the conversation that you and I've been having over the months is been very much in the here and now, to do with, right? Like,
yeah.
I think there was a push and there was some immediate funding along the way, but can this happen fast enough? And what do we do in the meantime while we're waiting for federal provincial relations to work themselves out? I mean, that's the existential question of Canada, but right now for others, we need to know.
Yes, that is the existential question of Canada. We have a messy, beautiful federation that is very complicated, as Ken has well outlined. I think we can do it fast. I mean, of course, this is a 5-year commitment. It's $30 billion over 5 years. It's recognizing that there isn't a switch that you can flick and all of a sudden create a massive expansion of spaces. At the same time, what this commitment, and let's be clear, this is the biggest commitment we have ever seen. This is dollars on the table over the long term so that municipalities, so that not-for-profits, so that provincial and territorial governments, Indigenous governments can say, let's build this out. Let's put those investments in right now so that they'll accrue over time. But what this commitment does in the short term is commits to funding reductions within a year. A 50% fee reduction within a year is a significant money in pockets to families. I think that what this also does is it flows money directly to operating costs, and it's also attending to wages and the wages in the sector, which will have a significant effect on retention and recruitment to the sector. And by the way, it will have all of those huge, important long-term effects that we need to grow our economy out of this crisis that the pandemic has brought upon us, and that we're going to need that heft. We're going to need that household spending power. We're going to need those women in the labor market to pay for the kinds of debts and deficits that we've absolutely had to take on collectively in order to manage this particular crisis. So I would say that it's always going to be an imperfect dance in our federation. I think pandemic federalism is a different kind of federalism. We've seen collaboration like we've never seen before. We are reimagining our federation in all kinds of ways. And we're going to come out of the other side of this huge crisis a changed nation, and in lots of very positive ways. And I think one of those ways that you and I have talked about is that we have understood in a way that perhaps we haven't understood before, that care is in to avoiding the kinds of vulnerabilities that we have experienced in this crisis.
Okay, thanks. So Diane Daly, we have been, I'm just seeing the comments come through here repeatedly about the workforce involved in delivering this, we're still a vision, right, about how we're going to deliver, but do we even have the people to deliver this, even if the money's there, and are they being paid enough? Are they being trained well enough? How are we ever going to, yes, we will, this money that we're getting from the federal government will at least aspire to bring down the fees that parents are paying. But what about the other side of the equation? Is the workforce there to be able to meet the demand, and are they being properly compensated?
Great question. Very pressing question, very critical question. I actually have to start off by saying a big thank you and recognition to all our educators in the third wave of COVID today. They have shown great resilience, they have pivoted, they have shown innovation across the sector of early learning and childcare, and they're to be commended for the work that they do. And certainly there isn't,
Cheers to that.
I feel that ECEs, predominantly women, are a very invisible group. Compensation and pay benefits are critical issues for the sector right now. And this sector cannot grow and advance in this strategy without at the core addressing this issue. The true value that ECs bring to the table is not recognized. We have, I was the other day reflecting as someone on the ground that we have staff in our organization that are committed to early learning and care, 20-year, 30-year employees, very skilled. They're doing the job because they like it. And if we're going to deal with our issue of retention, compensation needs to be a #1 priority. We've seen promises put on the table, and I think, the sector currently needs clarity. We need to stabilize, and we need clarity on what, particularly in the province of Ontario, what's the next step? The workforce is going to be crucial to the growth, and given the fact that we are now navigating significant health and safety protocols, if we build a sector, we won't have the workforce. If we grow, we won't have the workforce that's required to be on the ground, offering the high quality licensed care that we all imagine. It's a critical time to reimagine a workforce that feels that they're compensated and recognized for the work that they do.
So thank you for that. Let's throw it wide open to all four of you. I just want to pick up on that. So what do we do about that? If they're not being properly compensated, there aren't enough of them, and we have this giant federal program coming at us that will increase demand and hopefully increase spaces as well. Like, I mean, there's a huge supply and demand issue there. There's a wage issue. How do we solve that? Who would like to take that on? Okay,
I'm happy to.
Go ahead.
And I'd like to thank everybody for their reflections. I think this is a tremendous conversation, and I'm so glad we're having this as we're planning this out and as we're moving into the negotiations with provincial and territorial Indigenous governments. I think one of the things that's really clear, and that the remarks that have been made by all of the panelists underline, is that the kind of market approach that we have to childcare right now fails women, it fails employers, and it fails the economy. And there's really no amount of tax incentives or alternate arrangements that can undo this, because the kind of market approach that we have pits the financial and employment interests of one group, largely of women, usually moms, against another, who are ECEs. And of course, there's variation, but as Diane knows, about 85% of the operating costs of childcare are wages. So in this kind of market, lower wages mean lower monthly fees for parents. And there are lots of problems with this. And the legacy of about 70 years of this market model in childcare means that ECEs often don't have the kind of wages that they can live off of and raise a family, and that the majority of families can't afford the childcare. So the interest of one group is pitted against another, and no one is winning. Not moms, not families, not childcare workers, not our economy, and certainly not our children. And so the way to undo this tension, and I think that's what we're embarking on, this tension to raise wages and lower fees at the same time, is through public investment in the operating costs of centers. And there are no sort of tax measures that are going to do this. This is the undertaking that will do this.
Okay.
Can I just?
Yes, please, Ken. This is the universal view. So go for it.
Yeah. First of all, I want to thank Diane for her comments. I'm the chair of Alberta's second largest women and children's center that deals with women affected by domestic violence, and the staff at the shelter that I'm involved in have just gone through a tremendous year. We just had our first COVID case 4 weeks ago in our shelter, and just the dealing with that and how that affected the women and the children in the shelter was quite something. So I just want to acknowledge the important work that they're doing and the very difficult work that they've done over the last year. I've written a little bit about what the federal government plan is here, and what I've characterized it as. I've said that this is a lot of aspirations. There are many aspirations here, and I think Kate very accurately reflected a lot of the federal aspirations. But I also want to say that the perspiration is ahead of us, because we have a bunch of federal aspirations. We have a bunch of things the federal government says they want to accomplish. There's tension between, as I think Kate said, between what parents have to pay and what we're paying our workers. And then the third piece is the provincial governments and what the provincial responsibilities are. I don't think there's a single answer to this question. I think some provinces are going to come at this and say, we're going to increase the tax support. The province of Ontario has moved from a very anachronistic, old, terrible tax support system to a refundable tax credit that is the most generous in the country. And I think it's a good move in the direction of providing a different kind of tax support. And I differ from Kate. I think the tax support's part of the system that we have is very important. I think it's very poorly designed. And I'm to the extent I'm disappointed about anything about the federal announcement, is that the federal government delivers the tax support and they did nothing to make it. Right now, the tax support the federal government delivers all goes to high-income families. It's designed to support an old, outmoded model, and I think we should move that tax support from a tax deduction benefiting the rich to a refundable tax credit that shifts the benefits more down the income scale. And I'm disappointed that the federal government didn't do that. And I think now is the time for some provinces, like Ontario has done, to say we'll fix that tax support as part of moving forward. So I think there are many pieces to this puzzle. And I think, as I said, the aspirations are now on the table. The perspiration is ahead of us.
And can I just jump in? I say, I agree with Ken that families absolutely need support. We have a Canada Child benefit that has increased over the last year, that has had it was a policy that was embraced bipartisan across the political spectrum. It is an excellent approach to an anti-poverty measure, and it's supporting families. We need to continue that. That's not childcare. Tax credits also are not childcare. What we're talking about is funding the services so that families have access to robust choice. So not a Hobson's choice, not a choice between equally poor options, but a choice between high quality, accessible, affordable childcare, maybe working part-time or not, maybe grandparent care, whatever model is best for that family. But we want to create choice that is not a default for labor market exit, labor market withdrawal, that has all those pernicious effects. It's not just today that those effects exist, right? So, you know, I exit the labor market for 2 years and then another year after my second child. And then when I go back into the labor market, I suffer a motherhood wage penalty. I increase my and my children's lifetime risk of poverty. I decrease my ability to move up through the pipeline. I have smaller pensions as I age. All of those investments right now, making it not a default, but a meaningful choice among excellent options, have all those life course options for all of us. And those are experienced more acutely by those who have intersecting vulnerabilities. So I think tax credits are not the way to go in building good child policy, but I think that we do need to invest in families robustly, and we can violently agree on that, Ken.
I want to turn to Beverly Jean Danielle about, because you've got your eye on you know, the community level. Probably, I get the sense that you're paying particular attention to low-income groups, making sure that they get the care that they need. So, you know, when we're talking about provinces and talking about tax policy and talking about straight grants or whatever, do you have a view on what's going to be the most effective at that very grassroots level?
We have to look at how do we develop partnerships with organizations that provide supports to communities, right? Because these organizations are the ones, they're on the ground, they're embedded in the communities, and they have a much greater sense of what the needs are. In what ways might we be able to work collaboratively with these organizations to develop funding streams? So a really quick example, I've looked at some of the different funding streams that have come down from the federal government in terms of setting up childcare programming at the community level. And I've had to say to them, are you kidding me? Right? The language of the grant isn't translatable, right? You literally need to be an academic, and you're talking about building in all of these evaluative mechanisms. And I'm thinking, what you've actually said is, if you are a mainstream organization that has the staffing and the connections and the networks, we will give you up to $10 million to implement a program that you see fit. But it has zero benefit to the grassroots communities, right? So how might we be able to think about doing work in such a way that these communities can have easier access to the funds, that they're able to develop programming that is specific to the needs of the community members that they serve? I listened to Diane talking about the ways in which ECEs are paid. And I think we also have to add on to that the ways in which ECEs are trained, because a lot of the work that we're currently doing is looking at the fact that so many racialized kids, one, they're not getting good quality of care in some of the settings, and two, they're experiencing extremely early forms of racism in these environments, right? So now we're saying, let's put money into place, let's build a system, but let's not think about the impact on the end user, right? So we're sending kids into environments where they may not be getting the types of supports and solid grounding that they need. So the money sounds good, but are we ensuring they're getting what they need so that we can see these benefits? Readiness for school, lowered academic, in terms of the achievement gap? Are we actually seeing that these kids and their families are being provided with a solid base to have advanced economic outcomes in the long run? Right. So to me, if we're not setting it up in such a way that we're actually working with and bringing it to the communities based on the community needs, but we're leaving it at this sort of highly esoteric sort of level, it really doesn't filter down in ways that are useful.
Hey, thanks. I want to jump into some questions that are coming in from the audience, and I have a sense that this audience is excellent in terms of its engagement. So brace yourselves. Here comes some lots of questions. Some of them are for the minister, though, so I'm not sure how we'll handle that. But let's start with some more general questions. Okay, so here's a question from Leah Nord at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. What about more non-traditional childcare needs, like irregular part-time hours, the future, and how are we going to make sure that a national system takes into account that the fact that the workforce is changing in ways that we don't even know yet, right? Because the pandemic has just blowing that up. How are we going to make sure it's flexible enough to meet those needs? Who wants to take that?
So I'd like to look at that question. I think that there are a variety of options, and I think we need to be able to expand and in terms of looking at different types of care. And to the point Beverly Jean was saying, looking at precarious workers, looking at people who work shift work, evening care, childcare, options in licensed home-based childcare, I think are excellent options. They're regulated, they're quality, there's oversight by not-for-profit agencies. But that's a critical point, because as the economy reopens, we may see a sort of a different sort of demand for what childcare looks like. I think we can no longer consider childcare just something that's offered during the day. I think the other critical point too is that, childcare for many folks, many families, is a social support. So children who require support around learning needs, families who are dealing with tremendous levels of stress, they actually are not gainfully employed. They may have part-time work. They may not even be able to access employment due to other sort of constraints and social barriers. And so I do think it's a sort of a big emphasis on looking at lots of different options that are in a licensed, regulated system. And again, the emphasis is on the word system.
Heather, if I could just quickly, I think
Sure.
Beverly made such a powerful point. She said, I get these things from the federal government. And I think that childcare is run by the provinces today. The federal government's putting more money in. But the idea that the federal government is going to decide how the system is going to work across the country, I think Beverly highlighted why why would a government in Ottawa tell a childcare provider in Vancouver what should be done? Wouldn't we rather have those decisions made in Victoria and British Columbia or in the city of Vancouver? So I think decision-making and design decisions about how the childcare system should be designed should be pushed down to as low as possible level, so we don't have the kind of problems that Beverly just outlined. And I worry a lot that a lot of the debate about this is what Ottawa is going to do to build this national childcare center. And I worry that if we go too far down that road, we're going to end up with a lot of the kind of problems that Beverly just identified. So, and it speaks to this question about how do we make sure that our system is as flexible as possible? I think the answer to that is to push the design and the how you implement this stuff to as low a level as possible. And so I think the federal government's aspirational principles are great, but I think the perspiration has to be done at the lower levels.
I guess the problem with that is how do you make sure that there is enough ambition at every single level across the country, unless you have somebody really driving that
I don't worry about that. I think the demand from parents and demand from families and the money on the table will create a bottom-up demand for it. And I think how we do it in different jurisdictions, if it turns out to be different, that's fine. And there's a lot of people who think that's not fine. I think that's fine. It's a different system in every city I'd be fine with if that meets the needs, the local needs. So I worry too much about this top-down, universal, one-size-fits-all system, because there's so many different ways in which childcare is used and needed, and the kind of economies that it has to accommodate. We have to resist the temptation to be inflexible.
Can I jump in, Heather, or do you need to move on?
Yes, for sure.
Okay, sorry, I don't want to take over, so please feel free to tell me to stop talking. I could talk forever. I probably is not a great galloping surprise. I take issue with some of Ken's characterization with respect. First of all, I'd say I think there's actually a problem with the kind of lexicon we're using when we say a national childcare system, because that somehow implies that it's been uploaded to a higher level of government, and that's absolutely not what we're talking about. We agree, Ken. What we're talking about is a Canada-wide childcare system, which is something of a different order, so that we avoid the postal code social policy that we have right now, where you live in Canada determines what kind of access you get to childcare, what you pay in childcare, how you access the labor market as a result of those investments made by your provincial government. This is a Canada-wide strategy. Is about an evening of all of that, and I think, you know, to not constitutional law nerd out, but I think this is a perfectly appropriate use of the federal spending power. And I'd say that when we talk about expansion, when we talk about delivery, what we're talking about in the majority of the country is actually community-based childcare that is in not-for-profits, that is attending to those variables that you are cataloging right there, that are attending to the needs of local communities. And I think that's the model that is actually being, the word of the month apparently is to incent, not incentivize, but to incent. Every minister seems to be using incent. I didn't use it before, let's use it now. So I think that a shared principles in childcare accompanied by the federal spending power is an absolutely appropriate deployment. And we know that provinces, territories, and Indigenous governments are doing the heavy lifting in terms of delivery, in terms of regulation, in terms of workforce strategy, and so on. And this is putting money on the table and saying, we're going to do this and we're going to even it out across the country, so that if you live in Newfoundland or if you live in BC, you are going to have these levers so that we can all recover well, and we don't have a gender uneven recovery post-pandemic because we didn't push the right levers to even it out across the country.
I want to turn to another question here from our audience. What suggestions do you on the panel have about expanding childcare in areas where lease costs, and I'll expand that to real estate costs, are very expensive. And obviously our biggest cities are dealing with this issue right now, where just the cost of bringing the kids into a certain locale is just going through the roof. So what do we do about that? Sorry.
I would wonder to what extent we may have to look at the possibility of partnerships, and you know, for example, is it possible to have some type of partnership with the local school, in which we're able to bring a childcare center directly into the school, right? Because when we think of the number of people who could potentially benefit from that, you know, parents in the area, even the teachers themselves, or even students who might be young parents could potentially benefit from a childcare center directly in the school. I know I have seen situations in which sort of public providers have been able to private providers have been able to partner with schools to provide childcare settings within the school. That could be something that we could consider. Could we look at the possibility of using existing space in local community centers, right? We know that the governments tend to have lots of buildings that they have available that could be used for multi-year leases, right? As opposed to what seems to be coming down the pipeline, but we seem to have gone very quiet on this, that the government has been trying to sell off some of the buildings that they own in different parts of the city. So instead of selling off those buildings, are there ways in which we might be able to retrofit those buildings so that the local communities benefit from it, as opposed to private enterprise benefiting from it? So I think that there are a number of possibilities that we can look at. Even churches, right? What often happens with church buildings during the day or during the week, they often sit unused, right? Are there ways in which we could potentially partner with some of the churches to be able to use their spaces as childcare centers?
Why isn't that happening already?
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, I mean, it's not happening at the scale it should be. I was just going to say that I know that right now Saskatchewan, for example, is really focusing on school expansion, and Quebec right now is really focusing on school expansion. So I think there's some interest, but I think absolutely agree with Beverly Jean. It's not happening at all to the scale that we would hope, but there also hasn't been this level of funding commitment on the table to do those kinds of retrofits, to say to municipalities, identify those community publicly owned spaces, and also to put in our minds that if we are going to invest $30 billion in childcare, and some of that is going to be in operating and retrofitting, we might want to retain some public ownership of that asset that we're investing in. So it makes sense to prioritize the publicly owned or para-publicly owned spaces. Sorry, I interrupted you, Beverly Jean, I apologize.
No, I think that there's a big issue around infrastructure and the cost and funding. I mean, those are the key issues around spaces. We can go into
commercial, sorry, Diane.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say commercial real estate, because everyone's gonna start working from home, or some people, or a number of people, commercial real estate in some of our bigger cities in the next few years, it's gonna be very interesting to see how much unused space we have. I live in Calgary, and Calgary has had a problem going into the COVID, and it's going to have an even bigger problem coming out. I had a friend looking for real estate in Calgary, and they said, you pick a building, we'll find a space. So there's all kinds of commercial real estate. I just want to make a small point about, if you think it's expensive to deliver childcare in the big cities, try and deliver childcare in rural and remote communities. It's a different kind of a problem, but it's also very expensive. How do you get a critical mass of people in a rural and remote community? I once wrote about the problems of childcare in big cities, and I had a bunch of my friends from rural communities say, hey, wait a minute, what about us? It's really hard to find a childcare space in our rural and remote communities, in our Aboriginal communities. So I think there's a challenge on that side of the scale as well. Maybe our mid-sized cities are the best equipped to do our Red Deers and our Lethbridges and our Kamloops, but the big cities definitely have a problem. But I think there's a commercial real estate opportunity there that I think our provinces should start looking at potential solutions.
There's a question here from Alexander Walsh, the Regional Peel, which we've kind of touched on, but there's no silver bullet answer, so let's do it again. If demand is greater than supply, which is very likely, well, we see it all over the place, how can we make sure that vulnerable families who need affordable care aren't left behind? And obviously, I would just add to that question, that is the goal here for the federal policy, but let's not wait till we get to the final agreement, right? Can we tackle that right away? So who would like to start with that?
I think it needs to be just made a priority. I think we need to be sort of making a commitment. We've heard a lot of information last year around communities that are marginalized, racialized people. I think we need to continue to gather data. We need to be measuring. We need to hold ourselves accountable. We need to make sure that these conversations don't go away, and that we are actually seeing impact, and we're tracking that families that need childcare, families at risk, that priority is being given.
Yes, and the other thing that I'd say, and one of the challenges with the childcare market that we have in Canada is the creation of childcare spaces has often been left to either private for-profit actors, or for sort of small community organizations to develop childcare, but there hasn't been the same level of direct public management and public planning across the country that we require in order to attend to a whole range of variables. And I think that moving forward, what this budget and this commitment does is actually give some very strong and important signals and roles to lower levels of government, especially municipal governments, to do that kind of identification, to say these are the priority areas, these are their demographics, this is what we need to build moving forward, and create that kind of sequencing and leverage those partnerships that exist in communities across the country.
And I think I can sort of build on what's already been said. I think it is so important for us to really pay attention to who's sitting at the table. I was doing some work with an organization recently, all doing policy development, all of the work to impact high needs neighborhoods. And I said to them, do you understand that every single person on this panel or in this group does not have any real connection to those communities, right? You don't represent the racial makeup, you don't represent the class demographics of those neighborhoods. You don't know what life is like for those neighborhoods, but you're making decisions. So I think we have to be very, very careful in terms of even how we talk about this work, right? What if you make assumptions about what you think the neighborhood needs? You then set the agenda, or you set the framework based on what you stereotypically think that the community needs, and it falls flat because that's not what the community actually needs. Right. So to what extent are we going to make sure that those who are going to be impacted are literally sitting at the table saying, no, 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 this is what we want, right? So are there ways in which there can be flexibility built into how that funding is allocated, right? How it gets used, and as well ensuring that whatever policies and oversight mechanisms are in place, that they are taking an anti-oppressive framework, right? So when we talk about providing resources or even drawing upon resources to be built into these childcare centers, are we making sure that they positively represent the children who are in that space? Or are we providing money so that these kids can be exposed to problematic environments, but we're able to tick off the box and said, well, we did something for childcare, right? And this is where I continue to be concerned that those who are making decisions do not understand what that means when it's implemented on the front lines.
Such a powerful point. I just want to give credit to my co-author on my childcare paper, Dr. Jennifer Robson from Carleton, because she brought something to the table, and it's in our paper for CD Howe about there's a lot of new geospatial data, and this goes against what you're saying a little bit, Beverly, but I think there's some new geospatial data that says where children are being born, the types of communities in Stats Canada that maybe we can start using to identify the areas that need childcare investments more than others. And we should be open to having different kinds of investments in different kinds of places in Canada. We're really bad at that. We like to do everything equal per capita. But I think having local people at the table, but also some of this geospatial data to motivate where we think the needs are, and then we should go to the local communities and do the bottom-up stuff. So Beverly, that was a wonderful, wonderful point.
We have just time for one more here, but it kind of follows on what you've been talking about. It's a question about the role of municipalities in this, and you know, chosen the points of the question from the audience is that chosen panels do not represent all family dynamics. So you know, is there a role for municipalities? But I'll just smash that together with another question here, just because it's our last one. That, you know, how do we ensure that the lived experiences of diverse caregivers, you know, women, living caregivers, non-binary parents, etc., are used to create solutions? So how does that actually? I think we all agree that this we need to know at a very, very granular level how to spend this huge pot of money. How do you make that happen?
When I first started looking at this area of policy about 3 or 4 years ago and looked at what the different governments were doing, if you look at the city of Toronto and what a extensive childcare system they have just from the city of Toronto, and then the province has a system and then the federal government wants to have a system. What I'm hearing more and more from this conversation is we really need to build the system from the bottom up and not from the top down. We really need to have the maximum amount of flexibility that reflects the local conditions. And I think that speaks to having a system that's as flexible as possible, and that's as bottom up as possible, and as parent driven as possible, and as needs driven as possible. So I'll leave it at that.
Does anyone want to weigh in here with a final word on that point? I mean,
I would say that municipalities have a key role to play, and I think that's how you get local planning. That's how you sort of respond to local needs. I think that the issue of accountability needs to be put into policy, and people need to demonstrate how they're being accountable. How are they engaging community partners? How are they engaging families? And how does the family's voice get leveraged? And that we need to show sort of very strong evidence that we're able to do that. And it doesn't then become lip service, because most, people have many different pressures and priorities, and particularly families who are marginalized. And sometimes because their voice isn't at the table, sometimes there's a perception that they don't care, but they are juggling tons. And so we need to be better. And if we're going to reimagine what's better, we need to be able to fix that problem so that we are not paying lip service and so that we are actually thinking about how much lived experience and those perspectives can be brought to the table and leveraged for better outcomes for everyone.
Okay, thank you. So let's bring back in the minister, Ed, who has been listening, and can, now that we've solved some of his problems and made others worse.
Thank you.
No, thank you so much.
Thank you, Heather. You know, I've heard a lot of really insightful comments, and I just want to make very brief remarks to respond to some of the comments. The alignment between the federal government and the provinces and territories couldn't be more aligned than it is now. And we have never said that we're bringing a top-down approach. This is about a collaboration and a partnership, recognizing that early learning and childcare is a provincial responsibility. So provincial context is extremely important. And I've said repeatedly that we'll be flexible, that we'll negotiate in good faith. But at the same time, we have a responsibility to parents to deliver relief for these high childcare fees, for example. We have a responsibility to increase spaces, and we have a responsibility to move quickly on this. Funding should go to regulated spaces. If tax credits don't build a system, tax credits don't build higher quality and training of ECEs. We are creating spaces. We are creating a more recognized and incentivized and trained and recruited early childhood educator workforce, committed to high quality. You do that by building a system. You don't deliver tax credits. Tax credits don't do any of that. A key point about the workforce. Key to everything that we're trying to do is a highly motivated, well-trained, well-compensated, well-respected early childhood educators. And I really want to highlight Diane's comments on this. The early childhood educators have shown amazing resilience in the face of a lot of pressure brought forth before COVID and especially during COVID. And I really want to salute their efforts, and we have to support them. And that's why we're making the necessary investments to really turn our attention to support the early childhood educators, because they are at the heart of everything we're trying to do, whether it is maintaining the quality or increasing the affordable spaces. We didn't touch enough on Indigenous early learning and childcare. $2.5 billion additional in budget 2021 to co-develop an Indigenous early learning and childcare system across the country with Indigenous governments and communities. And this has to include urban, rural, and northern Indigenous communities that are off reserve as well. And one final comment to really refocus our attention on why we're doing this. We're doing this because for two reasons. One is to really provide choices for parents, especially women with children, to be able to have access to paid work, to be able to have access to an opportunity to start a business or to go back to school or to rejoin the workforce. We have an opportunity in this country to literally close the gap between men and women's participation in the labor market through this investment. We have an opportunity to really give all children in Canada the best possible start in life, including kids who've been excluded from the system for far too long. Even in a province like Quebec that has made huge strides in early learning and childcare, there are 51,000 children in wait lists for an affordable childcare space. So our investments to build a Canada-wide system will also work for Quebec, because they will use some of that money to increase the number of affordable childcare spaces and also train and recruit more early childhood educators. And coming back to the educators, they've been overlooked and underpaid for far too long. We intend to address that. and our strategy involves a focus on that. We are not peddling a top-down system. This is a collaborative approach. We will be flexible, but in a reasonable way. We are not going to negotiate on affordability, for example. We have to deliver affordability. We're not going to negotiate away quality. We have to maintain quality. We're not going to negotiate away regulated spaces. This is about building a system together. Now, are there some flexibilities with respect to different provinces and their priorities within this larger framework? Of course there is. And we have said that we are open to that, as we have been open through the bilateral agreements. But make no mistake, this is about building a system that, while delivering deep savings to parents, also delivers high quality and affordable childcare for all kids in Canada. So thank you very much. I really want to thank everyone here for their work in this space. We wouldn't be able to do this, build this system without you. It's not just about the feds and the provinces and territories. And I look forward to working together with all of you and to keep coming back to update you on the progress. But I'm very optimistic, and you will be hearing a lot of good news about progress and check marks on this in the next few weeks, if not months. Merci beaucoup tout le monde.
Let's turn to the commentators, one from each room, to just give a summary of where the discussion went. And so let's start with the discussion on school board delivery of ECE, and I guess that's Ziba Ahmed who led that discussion.
Yes, thanks, Heather. So I'm in Saskatoon. We had a great discussion. I think there was a couple of us from the West and then Ontario. But I think just a couple of the key takeaways that, definitely it is important to, and Ontario has done this already, but consider how can we have the existing facilities of the schools that are in communities, continuity for students and families as well, before and after care. But no doubt there is an issue between then the disparity of the salaries of the early childcare workers and the teachers, and that's something that does need to be addressed. And how can we, and I look at us in Saskatchewan, we're not there yet. So if we're going to get into that, then to address some of those issues, hopefully sooner rather than later. But it is a work in progress for sure. But the value of schools being an integral part of early childcare delivery as well.
Okay, thank you. And so now let's go to advocacy efforts. Alana Powell.
Hi, Heather. Thanks so much. I'll try to be brief. Our conversation was so exciting and everyone was really energized by the panel, which was great. A couple themes really emerged in terms of next steps and advocacy. Obviously, we acknowledged that it can be challenging when everyone is so tired, so burnt out. Early childhood educators, supervisors, they've been working tirelessly the last year. But this is an opportunity for us all to really come together, work in collaboration, work in solidarity to build the system we need. So we talked about, the need to engage the workforce, to engage families and parents, and this came up in the panel as well. Diane and Beverly Jean spoke to it. We need to think deeply about whose voices are at the table, who's included in these conversations. We talked about the need for public education and thinking about what does this Canada-wide childcare system offer us, and how can we be sure that those messages are being clearly communicated to families in our provinces, and really the need to do this collaboratively, right? This isn't a time for us to be having our own conversations in different directions, but to come together with shared messaging, shared values, and shared goals, which we know we have, and work strategically. So we talked about tools, opportunities to do that work together. And I think I'll just end there. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. And Kim Hiscott, who was with Capital Infrastructure, Pedagogy and Quality.
Yes, we like Alana, we were all very energized, feeling really very supported actually from the conversation, and thinking that we're on a great path forward. That was a huge topic for us. You know, capital funding, pedagogy, quality. I started off by giving some of my insights and some messages. Particularly that we must remember that as much as Minister Hussen was saying, he wants to invest in the regulated system is actually minimum standards, that we think we can do more. We must be really expansive in our thinking and very proactive. And we talked a lot about the importance of pedagogy and how we need to ensure that the educators that are delivering the system, the different systems, are well supported in order to be able to, we have confidence and respect for their roles, and but they need the conditions to be well supported. In terms of capital infrastructure as well, there is a current system. It's not working great. We need to make sure that investment is going to be prioritized for expansion. That we know that this is the families are absolutely needing this opportunity, and so we should expect that there's going to need to be an investment, and that investment will look different in different communities, and there's opportunities for some different leadership here. So in terms of some very specific takeaways, we wanted to make sure that one of the key messages that was received by those who are in the decision-making opportunities, that the valuing of outdoor spaces is equally as important as the valuing of indoor spaces. We want to make sure that that's very much included in the quality conversation. There was a great idea by Michelle Lupa to establish a national charter of principles that articulate a grounding set of objectives and goals, so that we all have a very strong starting point around pedagogy quality. Also an opportunity to really think about an active reconciliation and consultation with our Indigenous partners. Also to really embolden strategic partnerships in all levels of federal and provincial government. So this is not, when we talk about a Canada-Wide Childcare Plan, it's not just about the minister responsible for children. It actually covers all of our ministries. And also a platform. We need to really think about a platform for post-secondary credentialing to really be able to talk about what a high quality trained workforce would look like, and how do we make sure that that's happening, and much more, but I'll stop there.
Okay, thanks. So and on the potential for public delivery, Imas Akbari.
Hi, Heather, thank you. So we had three major themes that we discussed. One that has been echoed in the main room: the qualified staff have to be central to the expansion. With shortages of qualified workforce, we can't allow expansion to be accommodated by reductions in qualifications. This will obviously greatly impact the learning environment. So negotiations must include funding allocations to the workforce. Often the workforce challenges in ECE are associated with reduced qualifications, and this is not what we see in the healthcare sector. Children deserve a strong, solid foundation of learning. Also, as we grow, we need a significant capital dollars to be invested in public and nonprofit centers. The demand will far exceed the capacity of the system, and the for-profit sector will fill the void if sufficient capital dollars are not invested. Also, public centers are more likely to be located in neighborhoods with high levels of inequity and serve children who are younger and economically disadvantaged, areas that are often not attractive to nonprofit or profit organizations. And lastly, and very importantly, a real push to have municipalities to have a role in negotiations. They play a key role in planning and developing the system, the childcare system, as really trilateral negotiation and agreement partners. Municipalities significantly contribute to the childcare system. They can leverage relationships with school boards and development, and they are often the largest providers of children's programs.
Okay, thank you. So on nonprofit delivery, Sheila Olan-McLean. You're on mute.
Yeah, there we go. Thank you. Thank you so much. We had a great conversation in our group as well. And I started off by offering a metaphor for what we're trying to build. And it's when we think about building a house, and we consider the number of bedrooms needed for our family, the materials and workmanship that make it strong and durable. And we need to consider how we pay for it. Will we borrow the money from the bank? But at the end of the day, it is the house builder that owns the house. Canada is building a house for childcare. And so at the end of the day, we need it to be community owned and community driven. Hospice does matter. Not-for-profits serve their communities. The very purpose of not-for-profits is for community good, whereas the purpose of for-profit centers or for-profit corporations is for personal gain. So, so just making those distinctions, making sure that we have that. There was discussion in the room about really making sure that we have very clear, clear messages about no expansion in the for-profit sector. That recognizing, I think there was some talk about recognizing that the current for-profit centers, that we don't want to get rid of them. We can't. They are, in Ontario, they are 25% of our childcare. But it would be the expansion dollars wouldn't be going into, expansion dollars not going to for-profit centers. And that we really just need to make a very clear statement about that delineates, because we know in some of our provinces that we have, that we are at risk of having a lot of money going into for-profit. And I will say too that I've already started getting phone or emails from corporations and people in Europe asking about the childcare, the new childcare dollars. And so the spotlight is on Canada right now for expansion of international for-profit childcare. And then it ended up with a question about how do we influence our government in Ontario to, and so just thinking about together is better and coming together, certainly the same as Alana's message about coming together and thinking together for moving us forward.
Okay, thanks. And Sahara led a group, a general group of people who couldn't decide, I guess. So go ahead.
Yeah, I'll be very quick. We had a general reflection on the panel. A few things that we talked about was the importance of having capital, but making sure that having affordable spots, but making sure it's not a tiered system like what happens in Quebec. We talked about 24/7 childcare and accessibility. And so in talking about flexible childcare, we talked about the dangers of how a for-profit system might not have the interests of some of the most vulnerable in mind, just because of the model. And we also talked about children with disabilities and making sure that they're not left behind.
Okay, thanks. So that is the end of our discussions. I just want to say it's so inspiring to listen to all of you. I know we've all had a really rough year. You guys, especially, so many of you had a really rough year, and then there's so much enthusiasm and creative energy that is just surrounding us. It's quite amazing how resilient everyone is. So thanks for having me. And I'm just going to turn this over to for some closing remarks to Stephanie McClellan from First Policy Response.
Hi, thank you so much, Heather, and thank you everyone for joining us and sticking with us today. Many thanks to all of us who made this event happen after months of planning. The core team at First Policy Response, including Kareem Bardisi, Matthew Mendelson, Sahar Shafiq, Katria Bolger, Braylon Guppy, Kyle Gerencio, and Noor Abdallah. Thank you to our partners at the Toronto Star, especially Heather Scoffield, Irene Gentle, Scott Colby, and Andrew Phillips. Many thanks to the Lawson Foundation for their generous support to make this event possible, in particular, Christine Alden and Marcel Louzier. Thank you to Minister Ahmed Hussen and to his office. Thank you to our speakers and commentators for sharing your candid insights and perspectives with us. And thank you to the audience. Thank you for joining us in this important conversation. As Heather mentioned, it was so inspiring to see your energy and the dedication that you have for this, especially after such an exhausting year. We would like to keep this conversation going because we realize it is so important to keep as many different voices as possible engaged in policy conversations. So as part of that, we are going to be looking to interview some people who took part in this discussion for a video on this topic. So we are dropping a link to a Google form into the chat. So if somebody is if you're interested in taking part, you can click on the link to the Google form and fill that out, and we can get in touch with you if you're interested in participating or contributing in any way to keeping this conversation going. I'd also like to point out that as part of our partnership with the Toronto Star, we have 2 op-ed pieces that have been published this week. One was by Kim Hiscott, who you saw moderating one of our breakout rooms. Kim's wrote about the importance of nonprofit childcare. And Monica Lizak from Sheridan College wrote about the importance of building the EC workforce. So you can read both of those pieces both on policyresponse.ca and also on thestar.com. You can also visit policyresponse.ca to sign up for our Friday newsletter. And you can find links on how to, lots of other content, lots of other information about childcare and other important policy issues as we recover from the pandemic in an inclusive and sustainable way. And you can find links on how you can pitch your articles to us, share your ideas. All of that good stuff is there at policyresponse.ca. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a wonderful day, and we hope to see you again soon. Take care.